"We're going tomorrow, Mom. I've sold your beach house." But what she didn't know was, some secrets are worth more than oceanfront property. Some lies are built on foundations deeper than sand. The champagne flute trembled in my manicured fingers as my daughter's words echoed through the marble foyer of my Beacon Hill mansion. 30 years of building an empire, of clawing my way from the projects of Detroit to the highest echelons of Boston society, and my own flesh and blood had just pulled the rug from under my Louboutin heels. "What did you just say?" I whispered, though I'd heard every syllable perfectly. The afternoon light streaming through the crystal chandelier cast rainbows across Vanessa's determined face, and for a moment, she looked exactly like her father. The same stubborn set to her jaw, the same fire in her dark eyes. "The papers are already signed, Mom. The buyers take possession next week." Vanessa shifted her weight, designer handbag clutched like armor across her chest. "It's for the best. You know it is." The best? The Malibu beach house wasn't just property. It was my sanctuary, my secret, my lifeline to a past I'd spent decades burying. But how could I tell her that without unraveling everything I'd built? I was Celeste Morrison now, tech mogul, philanthropist, the woman who'd revolutionized cloud computing and donated millions to education reform. But I hadn't always been her. And that house held the proof. "Vanessa, you don't understand." "I understand plenty." Her voice cracked, revealing the hurt beneath her businesslike facade. "I understand that Dad's been gone for 5 years, and you still won't let us clean out his things. I understand that you disappear to that house for weeks at a time and come back looking like a ghost. I understand that you're drowning in memories, and that place is an anchor pulling you down." If only she knew how right she was, and how catastrophically wrong. Chapter 1: The Weight of Waves. The call came at 3:47 a.m., 2 days after Vanessa dropped her bombshell. I'd been lying awake anyway, staring at the oil painting of the Golden Gate Bridge that dominated my bedroom wall, a gift from Marcus on our 20th anniversary. He'd commissioned it from a local artist, had them paint the fog rolling in exactly the way it looked from our deck in Malibu, the deck where we'd shared coffee every morning for 15 years. "Mrs. Morrison?" The voice was crisp, professional, tinged with a slight accent I couldn't place. "This is Detective Sarah Chen with the Malibu Police Department. We need to speak with you regarding the property at 47 Pacific Coast Highway." My blood turned to ice water. "What about it?" "There's been a development. We found something during the inspection for the new buyers. Something that requires your immediate attention." The phone slipped in my sweaty palm. "What kind of something?" "The kind that's best discussed in person. How soon can you get here?" I was on a red-eye flight 4 hours later. Having told Vanessa I had emergency business meetings in Los Angeles. The lie came easily. Too easily. But then again, I'd been perfecting the art of deception for 30 years. The Malibu house sat perched on a cliff like a glass and steel prayer, its floor-to-ceiling windows reflecting the morning sun off the Pacific. I'd bought it in 2003, back when Marcus and I were still pretending our marriage was salvageable, back when we thought expensive real estate could fill the holes in our hearts. Detective Chen was waiting in the driveway, a compact woman with intelligent eyes and prematurely gray hair pulled back in a severe bun. She watched me climb out of my rental car with the expression of someone who'd seen too much and believed too little. "Mrs. Morrison, thank you for coming so quickly." "Of course, though I have to admit, I'm confused about what could possibly require police involvement in a routine home inspection." She gestured toward the house. "Shall we?" The front door hung open like a mouth caught mid-scream. Inside, the minimalist living room I'd carefully curated looked violated. Furniture moved, walls probed, the very air disturbed by strangers' hands. But it was the hole in the hardwood floor that made my knees buckle. "The new buyers wanted to install a wine cellar," Detective Chen explained, her voice echoing in the hollow space. When the contractors started digging, they found something unexpected. I stared into the rectangular cavity, maybe 6 feet long and 3 feet deep, my throat constricted until I could barely breathe. What did they find? Bones, Mrs. Morrison. Human bones. The room tilted sideways, and I gripped the back of a chair to keep from falling. After 30 years, my past had finally clawed its way to the surface. Chapter 2, Detroit Roots. To understand how I ended up staring into that hole, you have to understand where I started. Detroit, 1985. Reagan was president, crack was eating the inner city alive, and I was Celeste Washington, a 20-year-old girl with big dreams and bigger problems. I lived with my grandmother, Mama Pearl, in a shotgun house on Corktown's meanest street. She raised me after my mother overdosed when I was 12, teaching me that survival meant being smarter, tougher, and more ruthless than anyone expected a poor black girl to be. "Baby girl," she'd say, her arthritic fingers working cornrows into my hair. "The world's gonna try to count you out before you even step up to bat. But you got something special in you. I can see it burning behind them eyes." What she saw was desperation disguised as ambition. I'd won a partial scholarship to Wayne State University for computer science, a field so new and male-dominated that I might as well have announced I was planning to colonize Mars. But computers made sense to me in a way nothing else ever had. They were logical, predictable, honest, feed them the right input, get the right output. No lies, no manipulation, no broken promises. The problem was money. The partial scholarship covered tuition, but living expenses, books, lab fees, that was all on me. Mama Pearl was surviving on Social Security and her church lady pride. I worked 3 jobs, cleaning offices at night, tutoring high school kids in math, and selling vacuum cleaners door to door on weekends. It still wasn't enough. That's when I met Tommy Rodriguez. He was nothing like the drug dealers who prowled our neighborhood like sharks in shallow water. Tommy dressed well but not flashy, spoke softly but commanded respect, and he had something none of the others possessed: vision. "You're wasting your talents, Celeste," he told me one October evening as I walked home from my cleaning job. "All that brain power, all that hustle, and you're scraping pennies when you could be making real money." "I don't sell drugs, Tommy. That's not who I am." He laughed, not mockingly, but with genuine amusement. "Drugs? Nah, baby girl. That's small-time thinking. I'm talking about the future. Computers, technology, information. That's where the real power is." He was running what would now be called an identity theft ring. But in 1985, it was so cutting edge that most cops didn't even understand what we were doing. We'd hack into credit databases, create false identities, and sell clean papers to people who needed to disappear. Battered women fleeing abusive husbands, undocumented immigrants, criminals looking for fresh starts. I told myself we were helping people, and in some cases we were. Tommy paid me $500 for my first job, more money than I'd made in 3 months of honest work. All I had to do was use my university computer lab access to break into a bank's customer database and extract account information. Simple, clean, victimless, or so I believed. Chapter 3, The First Cut. By Christmas of 1985, I was pulling down $2,000 a month working for Tommy. I moved Mama Pearl to a better apartment in a safer neighborhood, bought myself a used Honda Civic, and for the first time in my life, I wasn't counting every penny. The work was intoxicating. Every successful hack felt like a puzzle solved, a mountain climbed, a barrier broken. I was good at it. Better than good. I could slip in and out of secure systems like smoke through a keyhole, leaving no trace, taking only what I needed. "You're an artist, Celeste," Tommy would say, watching me work in the converted warehouse we used as our base of operations. "Most hackers are like burglars. Smash and grab, leave a mess behind. But you're a surgeon. Precise. Elegant." The compliments fed something hungry in my soul. Growing up poor and black and female, I'd rarely been called intelligent, never mind elegant. Teachers had low expectations. Guidance counselors steered me toward practical careers like nursing or teaching. And the boys in my neighborhood saw me as either a conquest or competition. But in front of those glowing monitors, typing code that could reshape reality with a few keystrokes, I felt powerful. The problem started when Tommy expanded the operation. What began as a small crew of 5 grew to 15, then 25. New faces appeared weekly, harder faces, hungrier eyes. People who weren't content with document forgery and credit card scams. "We need to think bigger," announced Jerome Washington, no relation despite the name, during a crew meeting in February. He was Tommy's new lieutenant, a lean scarecrow of a man with gold teeth and violent tendencies. "All this computer stuff is cute, but where's the real money? We should be moving product, not paper." "That's not what we do here," I said, surprising myself with my boldness. "We're not dealers." Jerome's laugh was like broken glass. "Listen to this college girl thinking she runs something. Tommy, you need to check your woman." "I'm not his woman." "And I'm not your anything," I shot back. "But I am the one making this operation profitable, so maybe you should listen." The room went quiet. Tommy looked uncomfortable, caught between his old lieutenant and his star performer. The other crew members watched with the hungry anticipation of wolves sensing weakness. "Celeste's right," Tommy finally said. "We stick to what works. Clean money, clean operations." But Jerome's expression promised the conversation wasn't over. 2 weeks later, Marcus Johnson walked into my life and changed everything. Chapter 4, The Golden Boy Marcus, was everything I thought I wanted. Tall, handsome, well-educated, from a good family. He was getting his MBA at University of Michigan while working part-time at his father's construction company. And when he smiled, it felt like the sun breaking through Detroit's perpetual gray clouds. We met at a coffee shop near campus where I was tutoring calculus. He approached me during my break, all confident stride and perfect teeth. "Excuse me, I couldn't help but overhear you explaining derivatives to that kid. You made more sense in 5 minutes than my professor did in 5 weeks." I looked up from my textbook to find warm brown eyes studying me with genuine interest. "It's just about breaking complex problems into smaller, manageable pieces." "Smart and beautiful. I'm Marcus Johnson." He extended his hand. "Celeste Washington." His palm was soft, uncalloused, the hand of someone who'd never had to fight for anything. We started dating slowly. Coffee dates became dinner dates, became long walks along the Detroit River, talking about our dreams and fears. Marcus wanted to revolutionize the construction industry with new materials and methods. He spoke passionately about building affordable housing, about using business as a force for positive change. His idealism was infectious. For the first time since I'd started working for Tommy, I began to question what I was doing with my life. "You're different than other girls I've met," Marcus told me one April evening as we sat in his car overlooking the city skyline. "Most women your age are worried about fashion or parties, but you think about the future. You have vision." If only he knew the kind of vision I possessed. The guilt was eating at me like acid. Here was this wonderful man talking about building a life together, and I was living a lie so complete I'd almost forgotten who I really was. The money from Tommy's operation had allowed me to reinvent myself. Better clothes, a nicer apartment, the confidence that came from financial security. But underneath the new exterior, I was still the same desperate girl from Corktown. "Marcus," I said one night as we lay tangled in his sheets, "if I told you I'd done things I wasn't proud of, would that change how you feel about me?" He rolled over to face me, his expression serious. "Everyone has things they regret, Celeste. What matters is who you are now, who you choose to be going forward." I wanted to tell him everything. The words were right there, perched on my tongue like birds ready to take flight. But then he kissed me, soft and sweet and full of love, and I lost my courage. Some confessions require more strength than others. Chapter 5, Blood Money. The beginning of the end came on a sweltering Tuesday in July. I was at the warehouse working on cracking the encryption on a new bank system when Jerome burst through the door like a hurricane of bad news. "We got problems," he announced, his gold teeth glinting in the fluorescent light. "Big problems." Tommy looked up from the identity documents he'd been reviewing. "What kind of problems?" "The kind with badges and guns. Word on the street is somebody's talking to the cops about our operation." My blood turned to slush. Talking how? About what? About everything. The forgeries, the credit card scams, the computer stuff. Somebody's laying it all out for the feds. Tommy's face went pale. "Who?" "Working on finding out. But in the meantime, we need to clean house. Get rid of anything that could connect us to the operation." I thought about the laptop hidden in my bedroom closet, loaded with hacking tools and encrypted files, about the fake IDs in my safety deposit box, about the stack of cash I'd been saving for a legitimate future with Marcus. "How much time do we have?" I asked. "Could be days, could be hours. We need to move fast." What happened next still haunts my dreams. Jerome didn't want to just clean house. He wanted to eliminate loose ends. Permanently. "There's only one person who could have enough information to hurt us this bad," he said, his hand resting on the gun tucked into his waistband. "Someone who's been here from the beginning. Someone who knows all our methods." His eyes found mine across the room, and I understood. "You think I'm the snitch?" The accusation hit like a physical blow. "I think you're a college girl who got in over her head and decided to save her own ass." "That's crazy. I've got as much to lose as anyone." "Do you? You got your little boyfriend, your new life all planned out. Maybe you figured trading us in for immunity was your ticket to respectability." Tommy stepped between us. "That's enough, Jerome. Celeste has been solid from day one." "Has she? Then explain how the feds know about the Michigan National job. That was just 3 of us. Me, you, and her. You telling me you talked?" "The Michigan National job, we'd hacked their customer database 3 weeks earlier, extracting account information for 24 high-net-worth clients. It was supposed to be a simple grab, in and out, no traces left behind. But I'd made a mistake. A small one, barely worth mentioning. But in our world, small mistakes got people killed." "I don't know how they found out," I said, but my voice lacked conviction. Jerome drew his gun. "Maybe I should ask you somewhere private, somewhere we won't be interrupted." That's when everything went sideways. Tommy stepped forward, his own weapon drawn. "Nobody's interrogating anybody. If we got a leak, we handle it smart, not stupid." "You picking her over the crew, Tommy." "I'm picking logic over paranoia." They stared at each other across 3 feet of charged air, 2 men who'd been friends since childhood now reduced to this moment of ultimate betrayal. I could see Tommy's finger tightening on the trigger, could see Jerome calculating angles and odds. "Please," I whispered, "please don't do this." But it was too late for please. The first shot shattered the warehouse's false calm like a stone through glass. Jerome stumbled backward, a red flower blooming across his chest. His own gun fired wild, the bullet sparking off a support beam. Tommy's second shot put Jerome on the ground for good. "Jesus Christ," Tommy whispered, staring at what he'd done. "Jesus Christ, what did I just do?" I knelt beside Jerome's body, checking for a pulse I knew I wouldn't find. His gold teeth caught the light, and I found myself thinking absurdly about how his mother would identify him at the morgue. "We have to call the police," I said. "Are you insane? They'll arrest us all. The investigation, the questions, they'll uncover everything. Tommy, you killed him. You can't just... It was self-defense. You saw what happened." But I could see the wheels turning behind his eyes. The same calculating intelligence that had built our operation now focused on covering up murder. "We have to dispose of the body," he said quietly. "Make it look like Jerome skipped town. If anyone asks, he got spooked by the investigation and ran." "Are you listening to yourself? This is murder we're talking about." "No, this is survival. His or ours, Celeste. That's what it's always been." And that's how I found myself helping the man I thought I loved bury a body under cover of darkness. Chapter 6. Shallow Graves. We drove Jerome's body to a construction site on the outskirts of the city, a half-finished subdivision that Tommy's father's company was developing. The irony wasn't lost on me, using Marcus's family business as a graveyard. The summer heat was oppressive even at midnight, and by the time we finished digging, my clothes were soaked through with sweat and something darker. Tommy worked with mechanical efficiency, his MBA training apparently extending to body disposal logistics. 6 feet's too deep, he said, pausing to wipe his forehead. 4 feet's plenty. Ground's too hard anyway. I wanted to vomit, to scream, to wake up from this nightmare and find myself back in my grandmother's house, young and innocent and dreaming of a better life. Instead, I kept digging. What happens now? I asked as we rolled Jerome's body into the shallow grave. Now we get our stories straight. Jerome got paranoid about the investigation and took off, cleaned out his apartment, grabbed his cash, disappeared. It happens all the time in our line of work. And if the police find the body? They won't. This site's scheduled for concrete pads next week. He'll be under 6 inches of foundation before anyone thinks to look. As we drove back to the city, I made a decision that would haunt me for the next 30 years. I can't do this anymore. Tommy. He glanced at me in the rearview mirror. Can't do what? Any of it. The operation, the lying, I gestured helplessly. I'm out. You can't just walk away, Celeste. You know too much. And you just killed someone. I'd say we're even. For a moment, I thought he might kill me too. His hands tightened on the steering wheel, and something dark and dangerous flickered behind his eyes. I did it for you, he said finally. Jerome was going to hurt you. I couldn't let that happen. You did it because you were scared. We both were. So what's your plan? Graduate, marry your rich boy, pretend none of this ever happened? The truth was, I didn't have a plan. All I knew was that I needed distance from Tommy, from the operation, from the person I'd become. The girl who'd started this journey to pay for college had died somewhere along the way, replaced by someone I barely recognized. I need time to think. Time's a luxury we might not have. If someone really is talking to the feds. But no federal agents came. No raids, no arrests, no investigation that I ever heard about. After a few weeks of paranoid vigilance, it became clear that Jerome's information had been wrong, or invented. Maybe he'd been planning to manufacture evidence to justify taking over the operation. Maybe he'd simply been lying. It didn't matter. The damage was done. I graduated summa cum laude 3 months later and married Marcus in a small ceremony at his family's church. Tommy came to the wedding, playing the role of old friend to perfection. When he congratulated me in the receiving line, his smile never wavered. "You look beautiful, Mrs. Johnson," he said, kissing my cheek. "I hope you'll be very happy." But his eyes promised that our story wasn't over. Chapter 7. California Dreams. Marcus and I moved to San Francisco 6 months after the wedding. He'd been recruited by a mid-sized construction firm looking to expand into sustainable building practices, and I'd landed a junior developer position at a tech startup called CloudVision. The early 90s were an intoxicating time to be in Silicon Valley. The internet was transitioning from academic curiosity to commercial reality, and everyone could sense that something revolutionary was brewing. At CloudVision, we were building tools to help businesses manage data across networks, primitive by today's standards, but groundbreaking at the time. My background in computer systems, enhanced by the practical experience I'd gained working for Tommy, made me invaluable to the team. I understood security from both sides, how to protect systems and how to break into them. The irony of using criminal skills to advance a legitimate career wasn't lost on me, but I told myself I was finally putting my talents to good use. Marcus and I rented a small apartment in Palo Alto and threw ourselves into building new lives. He worked long hours developing new construction techniques, while I coded until my eyes burned, trying to forget the weight of Jerome's body in my arms. For 2 years, we were almost happy. The first sign of trouble came in the form of a Christmas card addressed to Mrs. Celeste Johnson at our apartment. The return address was blank, but I recognized the handwriting immediately. Inside was a family photo of people I didn't know, parents, 2 kids, grandparents, with a handwritten note on the back. The Rodriguez family wishes you and your husband a Merry Christmas. Hope you're enjoying California. A friend from Detroit. My hands shook as I held the card. The message was clear. Tommy knew where we lived. More importantly, he wanted me to know he was still out there, still watching. Marcus found me staring at the card when he came home from work. "Who's it from?" he asked, loosening his tie. "Wrong address, I think. Must be for the previous tenants." The lie came easily, automatically. After 3 years of practice, deception had become my native language. More cards followed over the next few months. Birthday wishes, Easter greetings, a sympathy card when Mama Pearl died, arriving before I'd even told anyone she was sick. Each one a subtle reminder that Tommy hadn't forgotten about me. I considered going to the police, but what could I tell them? That a man I'd once worked with was sending me holiday cards? They'd think I was paranoid. Besides, involving law enforcement would mean explaining my past, and that was a conversation I wasn't ready to have with anyone, least of all, my husband. Chapter 8. Rising Tide. CloudVision went public in 1994, and my stock options made me wealthy overnight. Not rich by Silicon Valley standards, but comfortable enough to buy a house in Menlo Park and start thinking about the future in concrete terms. Marcus wanted children, and so did I, but month after month, the pregnancy tests came back negative. The doctors couldn't find anything wrong with either of us, which somehow made the failure worse. Unexplained infertility, they called it, as if giving it a name made the heartbreak bearable. I threw myself into work with increasing intensity. By 1996, I was CloudVision's head of security, tasked with protecting our clients' data from exactly the kind of attacks I'd once specialized in. The irony was delicious and terrible. That's when I had my breakthrough. Traditional network security was reactive. Build walls, detect breaches, clean up after attacks. But what if we could predict vulnerabilities before they were exploited? What if we could use artificial intelligence to anticipate and prevent security failures? I pitched the concept to CloudVision's board, but they weren't interested in funding what they saw as theoretical research. So I began developing the technology on my own time, using my home computer and whatever resources I could scrounge. The algorithm I created was elegant in its simplicity. By analyzing patterns in network traffic, system vulnerabilities, and historical attack data, it could predict where the next security breach was likely to occur with 89% accuracy. More importantly, it could automatically implement preventive measures without human intervention. I called it the Sentinel system. Marcus found me working on it one night at 3 a.m., surrounded by coffee cups and technical manuals. "You're going to work yourself to death," he said, massaging my shoulders. "What's so important about this project?" How could I explain that the system wasn't just about protecting data? It was about protecting myself. Every algorithm I wrote, every security protocol I developed, was another layer of armor against my past. If I could create something bulletproof enough, maybe I could finally stop looking over my shoulder. "I think it could change everything," I said instead. "Not just for CloudVision, but for the entire industry." He kissed the top of my head. "Then you better get some sleep. Can't change the world on no sleep." But sleep was becoming increasingly elusive. The Christmas cards from Tommy had evolved into other forms of contact. Flowers delivered to my office with no attached card, phone calls that disconnected when I answered, emails from anonymous accounts containing single photographs of Detroit street corners I recognized. The message was always the same. "I remember, I'm watching, I haven't forgotten." Chapter 9. The Disappearance. Everything changed on March 15, 1998. I was working late at CloudVision, putting the finishing touches on Sentinel's beta version, when my assistant knocked on my office door. "Mrs. Johnson? There's someone here to see you. Says he's an old friend from Detroit." My blood turned to ice. Did he give a name? Tommy Rodriguez. 20 years of careful construction, my marriage, my career, my new identity, suddenly felt as fragile as spun glass. I could pretend I wasn't available, could call security, could run. But Tommy had found me once. He'd find me again. Better to face this on my terms. "Send him in." He looked exactly the same, still lean and dangerous, still dressed like a businessman who moonlighted as a predator. But there was something different about his eyes, a hardness that hadn't been there before. "Hello, Celeste. You look good. Success suits you." "What do you want, Tommy?" He settled into the chair across from my desk like he owned it. "Can an old friend pay a social call? Congratulations on the IPO, by the way. CloudVision stock's been doing real well." "Cut the bullshit. What do you want?" His smile was all teeth and no warmth. "I want what's owed to me." "I don't owe you anything. See? That's where you're wrong. You think you can just walk away from our partnership, take everything you learned working with me and use it to make millions while I'm still grinding in Detroit? I left that life behind." "No, you stole from that life. All those security tricks you're famous for, all that cutting-edge knowledge that made you so valuable to CloudVision. Where do you think you learned it? I was your teacher, Celeste, your mentor, and now I'm calling in my fee." The office suddenly felt very small. How much? $5 million to start. I laughed, but it sounded hollow even to my ears. "I don't have that kind of money. Your stock options say otherwise. Plus, I know you've been working on some revolutionary new security system. The Sentinel project, isn't it? I think I deserve a piece of that action." "How did you—" "I told you, I've been keeping an eye on my investment. You're going to transfer 51% of the Sentinel intellectual property to a shell company I control, plus the $5 million in cash. Think of it as a licensing fee. And if I refuse—" Tommy reached into his jacket and pulled out a manila envelope. "Then I have some interesting conversations with your husband and your boss. And maybe the FBI." Inside the envelope were photographs, grainy surveillance shots of the night we buried Jerome. Images of me helping to dig the grave, of Tommy and me covering the body with dirt. The quality was poor, but the faces were recognizable. "You were taking pictures?" My voice was barely a whisper. "Insurance policy. I knew one day you might get ideas about forgetting where you came from." I stared at the photographs, my hands shaking. "You planned this, from the beginning." "Not from the beginning, but after you married your rich boy and moved to California? Yeah, I saw the writing on the wall. Figured I better document our partnership before you decided to erase it completely." The room spun around me. Everything I'd built, everything I'd fought for reduced to blackmail material in a manila envelope. "I need time to think." "Sure. Take all the time you need. I'll be in town for the rest of the week, staying at the Fairmont, room 1247. But Celeste?" He stood and straightened his jacket. "Don't take too long. Opportunities like this have expiration dates." After he left, I sat alone in my office for hours, staring at the photographs. The girl in those pictures looked so young, so desperate. She'd made choices that seemed reasonable at the time, survival decisions in a world that offered few alternatives. But that girl was going to destroy everything the woman had built. Chapter 10. Point of No Return. I didn't go home that night. Instead, I drove to Half Moon Bay and sat in my car on the beach, watching waves crash against the rocks while I tried to figure out how to tell Marcus that our entire marriage was built on a lie. The truth was going to destroy us. Not just the revelation about my criminal past, but the deeper betrayal that I'd been lying to him every single day for 8 years. Every morning kiss, every I love you, every shared dream about our future had been contaminated by my deception. But the alternative was worse. Paying Tommy wouldn't make him go away. it would only establish the precedent that I could be extorted indefinitely. He'd be back in a year or 2 years, demanding more money and more control over my life, unless I found a way to make sure he couldn't come back. The thought formed slowly, like storm clouds gathering on a distant horizon. I tried to push it away, to convince myself I was better than that, but the logic was inescapable. Tommy had positioned himself as an existential threat to everything I cared about. In the cold mathematics of survival, that made him a problem that needed to be solved permanently. I drove back to San Francisco as the sun was rising and spent the day researching everything I could about my old partner, where he lived, where he worked, who he associated with. The internet was still primitive in 1998, but I had access to databases and search tools that most people couldn't imagine. Tommy had done well for himself since I'd left Detroit. He'd parlayed our old operation into something much larger, a sophisticated identity theft ring that stretched from the Midwest to the East Coast. He had houses in Detroit and Miami, a fleet of expensive cars, and a reputation for violence that kept competitors at bay. He also had enemies, lots of them. The plan formed piece by piece over the next 3 days. Tommy was staying at the Fairmont, probably for the security and anonymity that expensive hotels provided. But he'd have to leave eventually, and when he did, he'd be vulnerable. I made my decision on Thursday evening. Chapter 11, The Malibu Solution. "I'll do it," I told Tommy when I called his hotel room. "But not here in San Francisco. Too many people watching, too many connections to my work. I have a place in Malibu, isolated, private. We can conduct our business there without interference." There was a pause before he answered. "You have a place in Malibu?" "Bought it 6 months ago. Investment property." The lie rolled off my tongue like silk. "Meet me there tomorrow night and we'll finalize everything." I'd actually purchased the Malibu house the next morning, using a shell company I'd created years earlier as a financial firewall. The realtor was thrilled to close the deal so quickly, especially for cash, and didn't ask too many questions about my urgency. The house was perfect for my purposes, perched on a cliff with no close neighbors, accessible only by a single winding road, with enough soundproofing to muffle any unpleasant noises. The previous owner had been a music producer who'd needed isolation for his work. Now it would serve a different kind of creative process. Tommy arrived at sunset, driving a rented Mercedes and dressed like he was heading to a business meeting, which, in a sense, he was. "Nice place," he said, surveying the living room with its floor-to-ceiling windows and panoramic ocean view. "Must have cost a fortune." "The money you taught me how to make." He smiled at that. "See? I knew you'd come around to seeing things my way. You always were the smart one." I served him wine, an expensive Cabernet I'd bought specifically for the occasion, and we sat on the deck watching the sun sink into the Pacific. For a few minutes, it almost felt like old times, two partners discussing business while the world turned around them. "So how do you want to handle the transfer?" Tommy asked, swirling the wine in his glass. "I've got the shell company paperwork ready. Clean documentation, untraceable ownership structure." "About that," I said carefully, "I've been thinking about our old partnership, about Jerome." His expression hardened slightly. "What about Jerome? Did you ever wonder who really tipped off the feds? Because I've had 20 years to think about it, and some things don't add up." Tommy set down his wine glass. "You trying to say something, Celeste?" "I'm saying Jerome was right about one thing. Someone was feeding information to law enforcement, but it wasn't me." The silence stretched between us like a tightrope. Waves crashed against the rocks below, and somewhere in the distance, a seagull cried. "You're accusing me?" Tommy's voice was dangerously quiet. "I'm not accusing. I'm stating facts. You killed Jerome to shut him up, but not because he was wrong about a snitch. Because he was right, and you couldn't let him expose you." Tommy stood up slowly, his hand moving toward his jacket. "You're playing a very dangerous game, Celeste. The game ended 20 years ago when you murdered our partner and made me an accessory. Everything since then has just been cleanup. That's when I pulled out the gun I'd hidden under my chair cushion, a .38 revolver I'd purchased from a private dealer that afternoon. No background check, no paper trail. Sit down, Tommy. For the first time since I'd known him, Tommy Rodriguez looked genuinely surprised. You think you can kill me? Sweet little Celeste from Corktown? Sweet little Celeste died in that warehouse 20 years ago. You killed her when you put that gun in my hands. He sat down, but his eyes never left mine. So what's your plan? Shoot me and dump my body in the ocean? Something like that. And then what? You think this solves your problems? My people know where I am, who I'm meeting with. When I don't come back, they'll come looking. I smiled, and it felt like broken glass in my mouth. Actually, they won't. See, I've been busy since we talked. Amazing what you can accomplish with the right computer access and a few fake identities. I pulled out a laptop and turned it so he could see the screen. Bank records showed large withdrawals from Tommy's various accounts over the past 3 days. Flight reservations to South America, hotel bookings in Rio de Janeiro, credit card charges at a Miami marina for boat repairs and fuel. According to digital records, you've been planning your retirement for months, skimming money from your operation, making arrangements to disappear. Tonight you're supposed to board a private yacht for a leisurely cruise to Brazil, where you'll enjoy your golden years under an assumed identity. Tommy stared at the fabricated evidence, understanding dawning in his eyes. You've been planning this. Ever since you walked into my office, did you really think I'd just roll over and let you destroy everything I've built? The yacht suffered an unfortunate engine explosion about 3 hours ago. Tragically, the owner and his passenger were killed in the blast. Bodies too burned to identify, but the passenger's wallet survived. Your wallet, with all your identification. Tommy's face went pale. You killed innocent people? I killed no one. The explosion was real. Maritime accidents happen all the time. But the bodies were already dead. 2 John Does from the county morgue, men roughly your age and build who died with no family to claim them. I simply borrowed them for the evening. The beautiful thing about my plan was its elegance. Tommy Rodriguez would officially die tonight in a boating accident, his body lost at sea. Meanwhile, the real Tommy would simply disappear, another casualty of a criminal lifestyle that offered no safety nets or retirement plans. You've thought of everything, he said quietly. I learned from the best. Tommy laughed, a sound like autumn leaves scraping against concrete. So this is how it ends? All these years, all that history, and you're going to execute me like a dog? I'm going to execute a problem. Nothing more, nothing less. But even as I said it, I could feel the weight of what I was about to do. Tommy had been many things: mentor, partner, blackmailer, threat, but he'd also been the first person to see potential in a scared girl from Detroit. He'd opened doors I never could have opened alone, given me skills I'd use to build an empire. One question, he said. The night we buried Jerome, did you know then that you'd eventually have to kill me too? I considered lying, but what was the point? No. That night, I still thought you were capable of redemption. And now? Now I know better. The gun bucked in my hands, and Tommy Rodriguez fell backward off his chair onto the deck. Blood pooled around his head like spilled wine, reflecting the last light of sunset. I sat there for a long time, watching the waves and listening to nothing but my own heartbeat. Somewhere in the distance, a foghorn sounded, and the automatic lights on the deck began to flicker on. There was still work to do. Chapter 12. Burial at Sea. Moving Tommy's body was harder than I'd anticipated. He'd been lean, but dead weight is always heavier than it looks, and I wasn't as strong as I'd been 20 years earlier. It took me 3 trips to get him down to the rocky beach below the house, using a tarp and a lot of determination. The tidal pools were deeper than they appeared from above, carved by centuries of waves into the cliff face. At high tide, they'd be completely submerged, but now they offered perfect hiding places for things that needed to stay hidden. I weighed Tommy's body down with rocks and chain I'd purchased that afternoon, then wedged him into the deepest pool I could find. The incoming tide would do the rest, carrying him out to sea where currents would scatter any remains across hundreds of square miles of ocean floor. By midnight, Tommy Rodriguez had officially ceased to exist. The cleanup took another 4 hours. Every surface he'd touched had to be wiped clean, every trace of his presence eliminated. I burned his clothes in the fireplace and scattered the ashes. His rental car went into the ocean from a different part of the coast, pushed off a cliff where the rocks would make retrieval impossible. The wine glass he'd drunk from joined the Pacific, along with the gun and anything else that might connect his final evening to my house. As dawn broke over Malibu, I stood on my deck with a cup of coffee and watched the waves erase the last traces of my past. The girl from Corktown was finally free, or so I thought. Chapter 13, The Golden Years. Marcus was asleep when I returned to Menlo Park the next evening. I slipped into bed beside him and lay awake listening to his breathing, marveling at how normal everything felt. The man beside me had no idea his wife had just committed the perfect murder. The next few months passed in a blur of corporate success and personal triumph. The Sentinel system launched to universal acclaim, revolutionizing network security and making CloudVision the most valuable tech company on the West Coast. My face appeared on the covers of Fortune and Forbes, and I was invited to speak at conferences around the world. Tommy's disappearance made barely a ripple in the criminal underworld. His lieutenants assumed he'd fled to avoid federal prosecution, a reasonable conclusion given the fake evidence I'd planted. His various enterprises collapsed or were absorbed by competitors, and within 6 months, it was as if Tommy Rodriguez had never existed. Marcus and I used our new wealth to buy a bigger house, travel the world, and finally start the family we'd always dreamed of. After years of fertility treatments and disappointment, Vanessa was born in 2001, a miracle baby who looked like her father and had my stubborn determination. I threw myself into motherhood with the same intensity I'd brought to everything else. Vanessa would have every advantage I'd been denied: the best schools, unlimited opportunities, a mother who could protect her from the world's sharp edges. I was determined to break the cycle of violence and desperation that had defined my own childhood. The Malibu house became our family retreat, a place where we could escape the pressures of Silicon Valley and reconnect with what mattered most. Marcus loved the isolation, the sound of waves, the way sunset painted the cliffs in shades of gold and crimson. "This is paradise," he'd say, standing on the deck with Vanessa in his arms. "We're the luckiest people alive." I'd smile and agree, never mentioning that our paradise was built on a foundation of bones. For 15 years, it worked. Vanessa grew up brilliant and confident. Marcus built his construction empire into a force for urban renewal, and I continued pushing the boundaries of technology. We were the American dream incarnate. An immigrant success story, a minority family that had transcended its origins through hard work and determination. But success has a way of attracting attention, and attention has a way of uncovering secrets. Chapter 14, Cracks in the Foundation. The first sign of trouble came in 2016, when a true crime podcast called Cold Cases began investigating unsolved disappearances in the Detroit area. The host, a tenacious former FBI agent named Rebecca Martinez, had started looking into Jerome Washington's vanishing in 1985. Jerome was a small-time criminal who suddenly vanished without a trace. Martinez explained in episode 47, no goodbye to family, no forwarding address, no activity on his social security number, or known aliases. It's as if he simply ceased to exist. I listened to the podcast while driving to a board meeting, my hands gripping the steering wheel until my knuckles went white. Martinez had done her homework, interviewing Jerome's mother, his ex-girlfriend, even some of his criminal associates. but the most disturbing interview was with a man I recognized immediately. Tommy Rodriguez was Jerome's partner in various enterprises, Martinez said. He claims Jerome left town to avoid federal prosecution, but several people have suggested there was more to the story. Tommy's voice crackled through my car speakers, older and more gravelly than I remembered, but unmistakably his. Jerome was paranoid near the end, he said. Thought someone was setting him up, feeding information to the cops. He started making accusations, threatening people. In our line of work, that kind of behavior can be unhealthy. Are you suggesting Jerome was murdered? I'm suggesting Jerome made some powerful enemies, people who didn't appreciate his loose talk. My blood turned to ice. Tommy was alive. Somehow, impossibly, he'd survived that night in Malibu. But how? I'd shot him in the head, watched him fall, checked for a pulse. I'd seen the blood, felt the weight of his body as I dragged him to the tidal pools. No one could have survived what I did to him, unless... I pulled over and replayed the podcast segment, listening more carefully to the voice claiming to be Tommy Rodriguez. It sounded right, but voices could be disguised, altered, and the interviewer had conducted the conversation by phone, never meeting the subject in person. Someone was using Tommy's identity, claiming to be a man who'd been dead for 18 years. But who and why? The answer came to me in a flash of terrible clarity. Jerome's family. They'd never stopped looking for answers about their son's disappearance, and now they'd found a way to use those questions as leverage. Someone knew what had really happened to Jerome Washington. More importantly, they suspected what had happened to Tommy Rodriguez, and they wanted me to know they were watching. Chapter 15. The Hunter Becomes the Hunted. Over the next few months, the signs multiplied. Magazine subscriptions I'd never ordered began arriving at my house. True Crime Weekly, Detective Stories, Missing Persons Quarterly. Each issue contained articles about cold cases, unsolved murders, and people who'd gotten away with perfect crimes. Someone was sending me a message. I hired a private investigator to look into the podcast's claims about Tommy, but his research turned up nothing concrete. The voice on the recording belonged to a man calling himself Thomas Rodriguez, but he'd provided no verifiable contact information and hadn't responded to requests for follow-up interviews. Could be anyone using a dead man's name, the investigator reported. Without meeting him in person or getting fingerprints, there's no way to confirm identity. But I knew someone was out there. Someone who knew enough about my past to make my life very complicated. The question was what they wanted and how far they were willing to go to get it. The answer came in December of 2016, wrapped in an expensive Christmas card addressed to my Beacon Hill address. Inside was a single photograph, the Malibu house taken from the road with a handwritten note on the back. Beautiful place for a burial. A friend who remembers. This time, I didn't hesitate. I flew to Los Angeles that same day and drove straight to the house. Everything looked normal from the outside. The landscaping company maintained it monthly and the security system showed no signs of intrusion. But inside, subtle changes marked a visitor's presence. Books moved on shelves, cushions rearranged on chairs, a kitchen drawer left slightly ajar. Someone had been through my sanctuary, touching my things, breathing my air. The real message was in the master bedroom, where they'd left a manila envelope on my pillow. Inside were copies of police reports I'd never seen before. The original investigation into Jerome's disappearance, witness statements, even crime scene photographs from the warehouse where I'd helped bury evidence. But the most disturbing document was at the bottom of the stack. A death certificate for Tommy Rodriguez, dated 3 days after our meeting in Malibu, listing cause of death as gunshot wound to the head and place of death as 47 Pacific Coast Highway, Malibu, CA. Someone knew exactly what had happened that night. They had documentation, evidence, proof of murder, and they were preparing to use it. I called the number written on the back of the death certificate, my hands shaking as I dialed. "Hello, Celeste," said a voice I didn't recognize. "We need to talk." Chapter 16, Ghost from the Past. We met at a diner in Santa Monica, a fluorescent-lit testament to American mediocrity where secrets could hide in plain sight. I arrived early and chose a booth with clear sightlines to both entrances, a habit left over from my criminal days. The woman who walked in 20 minutes later was not what I'd expected. She was young, maybe 30, with short-cropped hair and the kind of sharp intelligence that announced itself in the way she moved. She spotted me immediately and slid into the opposite side of my booth. "You're not Tommy Rodriguez," I said. "Very perceptive. I'm Jessica Washington. Jerome was my father." The resemblance was subtle but unmistakable. The same dark eyes, the same determined jawline, the same predatory stillness that had made Jerome dangerous. "Your father died 30 years ago." "My father was murdered 30 years ago. By you and your partner." She opened a briefcase and spread papers across the table like a prosecuting attorney presenting evidence. Police reports, witness statements, financial records, the entire story of our operation laid out in brutal detail. "Took me 10 years to piece it all together," Jessica said. "Dad wasn't exactly the record-keeping type, but he was paranoid. Kept notes, took pictures, recorded conversations. After he disappeared, my grandmother found a safety deposit box full of documentation about your little computer scam. Jerome was killed by Tommy Rodriguez. You were just an accessory to murder who helped dispose of the body. Under Michigan law, that makes you equally guilty." I studied the young woman across from me, seeing echoes of the man who died in that warehouse. "What do you want?" "What my father was owed. He was a full partner in your operation, which means his estate is entitled to a share of everything you built afterward." "That's not how criminal partnerships work." "Maybe not, but it's how blackmail works." She pulled out a tablet and showed me a video file, grainy surveillance footage of the night Tommy and I buried Jerome. The image quality was poor, but our faces were clearly visible. Dad set up cameras in the warehouse after things started getting tense with the crew. Insurance, he called it. The footage has been sitting in a storage unit in Detroit for 3 decades, waiting for someone smart enough to understand its value. I watched myself helping to dig a grave, my younger self moving with desperate efficiency under the warehouse lights. The woman I'd become felt sick looking at the girl I'd been. How much? 10 million, plus ongoing royalties from any technology developed using knowledge gained during your association with my father. That's insane. I don't have that kind of money. CloudVision's IPO made you worth over 50 million. Your current net worth is estimated at 200 million. 10 million is pocket change. She'd done her homework. And if I pay? Then this footage gets buried deeper than my father's body. You go back to your perfect life and I disappear forever. And if I don't? Jessica smiled, and it was her father's smile, all teeth and no warmth. Then this footage gets uploaded to YouTube, sent to every major news outlet, and delivered to the FBI. Your husband finds out who he really married. Your daughter learns what kind of woman raised her. Your business partners discover they've been sleeping with a murderer. She was offering me the same choice Tommy had 20 years earlier, pay or watch my world burn. But I wasn't the same desperate woman who'd agreed to bury a body to save her skin. "I need time to consider your proposal." "Of course. Take all the time you need." She stood and shouldered her briefcase. "I'll be in Los Angeles for the rest of the week. When you're ready to discuss terms, call the number I gave you." "Jessica," I called as she reached the door. "Your father was a good man who got caught up in bad circumstances. He didn't deserve what happened to him." She turned back, and for a moment, I saw grief flicker behind her mask of professional composure. "No," she said quietly. "He didn't. But that doesn't change what you did." After she left, I sat in that diner for another hour, drinking coffee and watching traffic crawl along the Pacific Coast Highway. 30 years of building a legitimate life, and it all came down to this: pay the daughter or watch my carefully constructed world collapse like a house of cards. But Jessica Washington had made one crucial mistake. She assumed I was still the same person who'd panicked when confronted with blackmail. She was about to learn how wrong she was. Chapter 17. Like Father, Like Daughter. I spent the next 2 days researching Jessica Washington with the same thoroughness I'd once brought to hacking bank databases. The internet made it easy. Social media profiles, employment records, financial information, personal relationships, everything laid bare for anyone with the right search tools. She was impressive, I had to admit. After growing up poor in Detroit, she'd earned a full scholarship to Northwestern, graduated summa cum laude with degrees in computer science and criminal justice, and worked her way up to senior detective with the Detroit Police Department. She'd been hunting her father's killer for over a decade, using police resources and contacts to build an airtight case. But impressive didn't mean invulnerable. Jessica lived alone in a converted loft in Detroit's Arts District, drove a 10-year-old Honda Civic, and had exactly $47,000 in savings. Not the profile of someone who could afford an extended blackmail campaign in Los Angeles. She was operating on borrowed time and limited resources, which meant she needed a quick resolution. More importantly, she'd made the same mistake Tommy had. She assumed I'd react to blackmail like a victim, rather than a predator. I called her number Thursday evening. "Ready to discuss terms?" Jessica asked without preamble. "I have a counteroffer. Meet me at my Malibu house tomorrow night, and we'll settle this face-to-face. Why there? Because it's private, secure, and fitting. Your father's story began with a burial. It's only appropriate that his daughter's story should end at one." There was a long pause before she answered. "Are you threatening me, Mrs. Morrison?" "I'm offering you a choice. Take $10 million and walk away forever. Or push this further and discover that some people are more dangerous than you imagined. I'll be there at 8. Come alone. And Jessica, don't make the same mistakes your father did. Some battles aren't worth winning." I hung up before she could respond. Chapter 18. History Repeats. The Malibu house felt different that Friday evening, charged with the electricity of approaching violence. I'd had the entire day to prepare. Security cameras disabled, escape routes planned, weapons positioned strategically throughout the house. Jessica arrived precisely at 8, driving a rented SUV and carrying a briefcase that probably contained more evidence of my crimes. She moved with the confidence of someone who believed she held all the cards. "Beautiful place," she said, echoing Tommy's words from 20 years earlier, though I suppose it's fitting that a murderer would choose to live overlooking a graveyard. "Would you like some wine? I have an excellent Cabernet." "I'm not here for pleasantries. No, you're here for money, just like everyone else who's tried to leverage my past against my future." We sat on the same deck where I'd killed Tommy Rodriguez, watching the same sunset paint the same cliffs in shades of gold and crimson. But this time, I wasn't the desperate woman being blackmailed. I was the predator setting a trap. "The $10 million, Jessica said, opening her briefcase. "I want it transferred to offshore accounts I've established. Clean money, untraceable." "Of course. But first, I have a question about your evidence." I pulled out my laptop and opened a video file. Security footage from the warehouse the same night Jerome died, but from a different angle than the clip Jessica had shown me. "This is interesting," I said, turning the screen so she could see. "Your father set up more cameras than you realized. This one shows the moments before Tommy shot Jerome. On the screen, a younger Jerome Washington could be seen drawing his gun first, pointing it at Tommy's chest. The shooting was clearly self-defense, not murder." Jessica's face went pale. "That's not... The angle doesn't show... It shows exactly what happened. Your father tried to kill Tommy Rodriguez. Tommy defended himself. The burial was unfortunate, but the shooting was justified." "You're lying." "Technology doesn't lie, Jessica, unlike people." I opened another file, financial records from Detroit police databases. Speaking of lies, let's talk about how you've been funding this little crusade, skimming money from drug seizures, selling confiscated evidence, falsifying overtime reports. You've stolen over $100,000 from the Detroit Police Department in the past 2 years. Her hand moved toward her purse, but I was faster. The gun appeared in my hand like magic, steady and certain. Your father made the mistake of thinking he could threaten me with exposure. You made the mistake of thinking you could do it better than he did. You're going to kill me. I'm going to give you the same choice I gave him: walk away or force me to protect myself. Jessica stared at the gun in my hands, understanding finally dawning in her eyes. You killed Tommy Rodriguez too. Tommy made the same error in judgment you're making now. He thought my past made me vulnerable, when actually it made me dangerous. The police know where I am. If I disappear, you told the police you were investigating a lead in Los Angeles. Happens all the time. Cops chasing dead ends, following false promises. Sometimes they just vanish into the city, overcome by the realization that their case was hopeless. I stood up, the gun never wavering. You have 60 seconds to decide. Jessica, walk away and never contact me again, or join your father and Tommy in whatever comes after this life. For a moment, I thought she might choose violence. Her hand twitched toward her purse again, and I could see her calculating odds, measuring distances. But Jessica Washington was smarter than her father. She'd inherited his determination, but not his recklessness. 50 seconds, I said calmly. She stood up slowly, hands visible and empty. This isn't over. Yes, it is. You're going to drive back to Detroit, resign from the police force, and disappear. Change your name, move to a different state. Build a new life somewhere far from here. Because if I ever see you again, if you ever contact me or anyone in my family, I'll hunt you down and finish what your father started. Jessica backed toward the door, her eyes never leaving mine. You won't get away with this forever. I already have. She left without another word, and I watched her SUV's taillights disappear down the winding road. Another problem solved, another threat neutralized. But as I stood alone on my deck, listening to waves crash against the rocks below, I felt something I hadn't experienced in years: doubt. How many more bodies would my past demand? How many more lives would I have to destroy to protect the one I'd built? The answer came to me with crystalline clarity: as many as necessary. Chapter 19. The Weight of Time. Marcus died on a Tuesday morning in March 2020, just as the world was beginning to understand the scope of the pandemic that would reshape everything. A heart attack at 68, sudden and merciful, taking him in his sleep before he could suffer. I held his funeral during lockdown with only immediate family in attendance. Vanessa flew in from New York, where she was working as an investment banker. And we said goodbye to the only truly good man either of us had ever known. He loved you so much, Vanessa said as we stood beside his grave. Sometimes I wondered how he got so lucky, finding someone as accomplished and brilliant as you. If only she knew how lucky he'd been, not to find me, but to die before learning who I really was. The years that followed were lonely in ways I hadn't anticipated. Success had always been my armor against the world, but success without someone to share it felt hollow. I threw myself into new projects, established charitable foundations, mentored young entrepreneurs, but nothing filled the Marcus-shaped hole in my life. Vanessa worried about me, calling daily and visiting whenever her schedule allowed. She'd inherited her father's goodness and her mother's determination, a dangerous combination that made her impossible to deceive for long. Mom, you need to get out more. Travel, date, find someone who makes you happy. I had someone who made me happy for 25 years. That's more than most people get in a lifetime. But she was persistent, and eventually I agreed to see a therapist, Dr. Sarah Chen, a psychiatrist who specialized in grief counseling. The irony of her name wasn't lost on me. though this Dr. Chen bore no relation to the detective who'd investigated Tommy's disappearance decades earlier. "Tell me about your marriage," Dr. Chen said during our first session. "What made it special?" How could I explain that what made it special was also what made it tragic? Marcus had loved me completely, unconditionally, without ever knowing who I really was. He'd built his life around a lie so complete that even I sometimes forgot it was fiction. "He accepted me as I was," I said instead. "He never tried to change me or judge my past." "What past?" I almost laughed at the simplicity of the question. "Everyone has a past, Doctor. The trick is learning which parts to share and which parts to bury." Our sessions continued for months, a careful dance around the truth that I could never tell. Dr. Chen was skilled, intuitive, dangerous in her ability to read between the lines of my carefully constructed narratives. "I sense you're carrying a great deal of guilt about something," she said during our 6th session. "Would you like to talk about it?" Guilt is just regret with a moral judgment attached. I prefer to focus on moving forward. But sometimes we have to process the past before we can embrace the future. If only she knew how much processing I'd already done. Chapter 20. The Final Reckoning. The call from Detective Chen came on a Thursday morning in September 2024, 3 months after I'd turned 60. I was in my office at Morrison Technologies, the company I'd built from the ashes of CloudVision, when my assistant patched through the call. "Mrs. Morrison, this is Detective Sarah Chen with the Malibu Police Department." The name hit me like a physical blow. Not Dr. Chen, my therapist, but Detective Chen, the same woman who'd investigated Tommy's supposed death 20 years earlier. "We need to speak with you regarding the property at 47 Pacific Coast Highway. There's been a development." And now, standing in my violated sanctuary with a hole in the floor where contractors had found Jerome Washington's bones, the weight of 39 years was finally catching up with me. "Mrs. Morrison?" Detective Chen's voice brought me back to the present. "Are you all right?" I stared into the rectangular cavity, my carefully constructed world crumbling like sand. How did they get here? That's what we need to determine. According to our forensics team, the remains show signs of trauma consistent with gunshot wounds. The bones have been in the ground for approximately 20 to 25 years. Not 39 years, then. Not Jerome Washington from Detroit. Tommy Rodriguez, the man I'd killed and thought I'd disposed of in the ocean. Somehow his body had ended up buried under my house. "Detective," I said carefully, "I need to call my lawyer." "Of course. But I have to ask, did you know these remains were here?" The question hung in the air like smoke from a gun barrel. Everything I'd built, everything I'd fought to protect, balanced on the razor's edge of this moment. I could lie, claim ignorance, hire the best attorneys money could buy, and fight this battle in court. I had resources, influence, connections that could make problems disappear. Or I could finally tell the truth. I looked out through the floor-to-ceiling windows at the Pacific Ocean, where I'd thought Tommy Rodriguez would rest forever. The waves were exactly the same as they'd been that night in 1998, eternal and indifferent to human suffering. "Mrs. Morrison?" I turned to face Detective Chen. Seeing not just a police officer, but the culmination of every choice I'd made since that desperate girl from Detroit decided to take Tommy Rodriguez's money. "Yes," I said quietly. I knew. And for the first time in 40 years, I began to tell the truth. Epilogue. High tide. They found Tommy's body exactly where I'd put it 26 years earlier, weighted down with chains in a tidal pool carved into the cliff face. Rising sea levels and coastal erosion had slowly exposed the hiding place, and winter storms had washed the remains onto my property. The ocean had given him back to me. The trial lasted 6 months and attracted international attention. Tech mogul's dark past exposed, read the headlines, accompanied by photographs of the young woman I'd been and the empire I'd built on blood and lies. Vanessa stood by me throughout the proceedings, her faith in her mother unshaken even as the prosecution laid out decades of deception and violence. She held my hand during sentencing, her face carved from stone as the judge delivered his verdict. 25 years to life for first-degree murder. "I love you, Mom," she whispered as the bailiff approached with handcuffs. "Whatever you did, whoever you were, I love you." That broke my heart more than anything else, knowing that my daughter would spend the rest of her life carrying the weight of my choices. I'm writing this from my cell at the California Institution for Women, where I've been for the past 6 months. The accommodations are Spartan but adequate, and I found a strange peace in having no more secrets to protect. Vanessa visits every week, bringing news from the outside world and updates on the charitable foundations I established. She's liquidated most of my assets to fund education programs for at-risk youth, kids like I was, growing up poor and desperate in places that offer few legitimate paths to success. "We're going to break the cycle," she tells me during our visits. "Use what you built for something good." I nod and smile, proud of the woman she's become, despite everything she's learned about the woman who raised her. Vanessa has her father's moral compass and her mother's determination, a better combination than I ever deserved. Sometimes, late at night in my narrow bunk, I think about the girl from Corktown who just wanted to pay for college. I wonder what would have happened if I'd found another way, if I'd been brave enough to struggle honestly rather than smart enough to steal successfully. But regret is a luxury I can't afford. The past is written in blood and concrete, unchangeable as the Pacific tides. All I can do is live with the consequences and hope that somehow my daughter will find a way to build something beautiful from the wreckage I've left behind. The beach house is gone now, sold to pay legal fees and victim restitution. The new owners plan to tear it down and build something fresh on the lot, a clean slate where families can make honest memories untainted by old sins. That seems fitting. Sometimes I dream about the ocean, about standing on that deck and watching waves crash against the rocks. In my dreams, I'm still young, still innocent, still capable of choosing a different path. But then, I wake up in my cell and remember. The tide always comes in and the tide always goes out, but the shore remembers everything the water brings, and some stains never wash clean. "We're going tomorrow, Mom. I've sold your beach house." But what she didn't know was that selling it would uncover the very secrets I'd killed to protect.